Hello, everyone, wherever you may be joining us from. This is Nation Watch, and I'm your host, Mervyn Williams, welcoming you to Nation Watch for today, 25th August 2024. And as we draw closer to regional and general elections, it's obvious that the People's Progressive Party continues to lose its way, continues to depart from democratic practices and norms, and embrace in a stronger way those behaviors associated with dictatorship. Tag Irfan Ali, tag Pauline Sukai, tag the chair and vice chair of the National Tushaus Council. History lessons today. Ali lied multiple times to the National Tushaus Council conference. Today we will fix that. No attempt, as he said, to rewrite history will be tolerated. Mervyn Williams stands between the People's Progressive Party and the rewriting of the history of this country as it relates to the indigenous issues. So tag them. Let them join us and let them benefit from this lesson in history. Well, the National Tushaus Council just had its annual conference, and it was quite an interesting conference from many perspectives. Ali made a declaration in his opening speech, and some of us sought to enjoy the freedom that he spoke of and met with some ugly consequences. Let's hear what Ali said.
That is a sweet feeling of freedom against oppression.
Let him say it again, shall we?
That is a sweet feeling of freedom against oppression.
President Ali is the embodiment of oppression, if ever there was in this country. Vincent Henry, Member of Parliament, Indigenous Guyanese, suffered the indignity of being evicted from the meeting place of the National Tushaus Council. I myself, a former parliamentarian and an indigenous Guyanese citizen, attempted to gain access to that meeting place and was denied entry, not by the National Tushaus Council or their representatives, but by the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Marine Affairs. In normal circumstances, when somebody prevents your freedom of movement, your physical movement from one place to another, that's a criminal offense. And when someone puts their hand on you and pushes you away and prevents you from going where you're legally entitled to be, that is called assault. And in normal circumstances, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Marine Affairs would have been the subject of an investigation for assault against my person. But it made no sense for me to report to the police because he summoned them. And when they came, the police personnel, both uniformed and plainclothes, demanded of me whether I was invited to this meeting. Clearly, they knew nothing about what was going on or the legislation that governed the proceedings. And clearly, they too were under political instructions and directions. So this policeman, Williams, I think his name was, or is, it was on that tag there. And he was in this uniform of the commissioned police officers. Nice, fancy, silver ensigns on the lapel and shine shoes and so on, you know? Typical political servant decided that he was going to jump into a conversation and ask me whether I was invited or not. And to say boldly that he was there because of a possible security threat. But nobody could say who or what presented that threat. Ministers of government became involved. Kwame McCoy was there, but not in his element. He was subdued, nervous, unsure of himself, with a camera in my face. He wasn't his typical, as we would say in Guyanese parlance, typical abusing self. He was restrained because of the circumstances and the personality present. Followed me to the washroom with a camera, actually, Mr. Kwame McCoy. But when I pointed out to the permanent secretary the provisions of the Amerindian Act at section 43(3)(b), which I shall read for you, it says the National Tushaus Council shall allow Amerindians to attend its meetings. The National Tushaus Council shall allow Amerindians to attend its meetings. Now, there's no negotiations there, Mr. Attorney General. No need for an invitation, Mr. Attorney General. You are the leading person at the bar. You know what shall means in English, and you know what the implications of the use of the word shall is in law. So the National Tushaus Council mandatorily has an obligation to allow us indigenous peoples to participate in its meetings. So don't hoodwink nobody here, Mr. Attorney General. You slip showing. And of course, they resorted to influencing the People's Progressive Party, influenced their two activists, the chairman and vice chairman of the National Tushaus Council, into signing a statement which said that they had determined, in accordance with section 43(1), their own procedure and caused this occasion to be a closed-door meeting. Look at the agenda, and that's another story by itself. The agenda for the conference was given to people in the afternoon session of the first day. Look at these days' proceedings as outlined on the agenda of this conference. We can move from one page to the other. And you tell me, good citizens of Guyana and further afield, do you see anything there having to do with closed-door sessions? There's absolutely nothing that speaks to closed-door sessions. And I've spoken with a number of Tushaus who have told me that there was no deliberation on the question of whether or not there's going to be a closed-door session, and no deliberation whatsoever to do with determining their own procedures for anything at this just concluded National Tushaus Council conference. Absolutely none. However, a number of Tushaus have told me that they were instructed by community development officers and district development officers employed by the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs before they left their homes and villages that only Tushaus would be allowed in the dome. You know what that stems from? In the just concluded election for village councils and Tushaus, the People's Progressive Party sponsored a number of hopeful Tushaus. In large measure, the electorate in the villages rejected those proposed candidates of the People's Progressive Party. And in such cases where the PPP prevailed, the few cases, the persons who emerged as vice Tushau or deputy Tushau were the people's preferred candidates for Tushaus. So if both deputy and Tushau were to be present at the National Tushaus Council conference, there was this fear that the two would be speaking on the same issue with different approaches and seeking different outcomes. They would have been disagreeing with each other, because in those cases, the Tushau would be speaking from the PPP's line and the deputy would have been speaking on behalf of the people of the villages. So the People's Progressive Party took steps ahead of time to ensure that no one else was going to go into that dome. So the Tushao couldn't benefit from the presence of a treasurer to aid him or her with reporting on numbers and projects and grants. Neither could the Tushao ask anyone to deputize for them while they stepped outside if they felt ill or wanted to go and get something urgently done. So this decision was taken by the People's Progressive Party, Pauline Sukai and the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs and their officers, and communicated to the Tushaus in the villages before they left their homes for the conference. But because Vincent Henry was forcibly removed from that place, and because Mervyn Williams was denied entry, they were quick, the People's Progressive Party, to draft a statement and ask their faithful activists in the NTC to sign on to it and give the impression that it was a matter determined by the NTC. Absolute rubbish. And that's the freedom you are talking about, Mr. Irfan Ali. That is the freedom you are talking about. The freedom for you and your political subordinates to dominate, to persecute, to oppress, to manipulate, to seek to control the indigenous peoples of this country. That's the freedom you are talking about. And then they caused a resolution to be passed, a resolution that has no validity in law. We look at that resolution. It calls on it says that the NTC supports the low carbon development strategy. Well, let me tell you this, Mr. President and Minister of Amerindian Affairs. That kind of action is the exclusive preserve of the village general meeting. And since there were no village general meetings that dealt anywhere in this country that dealt with the issue of the low carbon development strategy and indigenous support or withholding of support for it, no Tushao at that conference had the authority to sign on to that resolution. Absolutely none. Even the chairman of the NTC and deputy chair were not authorized by the village general meeting in their respective villages to sign on to that resolution. That's the freedom you were talking about? The freedom to betray, the freedom to violate the statutory laws that govern a people? Let's get serious in this country. Let's stop this duplicity. Let's stop this hypocrisy. And let's deal with the issues before us for the good of all of the people of this country. We are going to have some history lessons in the limited time available. Mr. Ali, I hope you're watching. Or I hope that the person you assigned to monitor this program is taking copious notes and is going to make clips of these short points that are going to be made here. Let's hear what Mr. Ali had to say on this business of land titling.
Land rights were not recognized, nor were they protected. Land rights and recognition. The new Amerindian Act of 2006 was a landmark piece of legislation that provided legal recognition of Amerindian land ownership.
Let's take the first short clip again about not being respected.
It's a sweet feeling of freedom against oppression.
Yes, and the clip we just had regarding your rights and not being respected, your land rights.
Your land rights were not recognized,
Roll that again and
nor
let it
were
soak
they
in.
protected.
Roll that
Your
again.
land rights were not recognized, nor were they protected. Your
Good.
land rights were not recognized, nor were they protected.
And you will remember, viewers, that in this same speech, the same gentleman said that the People's Progressive Party were responsible for the First National Two Shows Conference. And you would have read in the media that the Amerindian People's Association said that, well, they claim too that they were responsible for the first national meeting of village leaders in Mainstay. So we're going to deal with the two issues together. The first meeting of village leaders and the question of land titling and land rights because they're intertwined. Take a look at this. It's old and battered, but the truth contained in it will continue to be immortal. No revisionist will be able to change them. Here's the caption of a chapter in this book, A Destiny to Mold. You see, when I come and I talk on these matters, people tend to doubt me because they don't know where I get this from and where he picked this up from and he making up stories. Well, my name is Williams, not Ali, not Jack Dale. Williams. A new era for Amerindian brothers is the title of this speech. And it is a speech that was presented to the Amerindian Leaders Conference. Guess where this first Amerindian Leaders Conference was held? In the chamber of the Parliament of the Cooperative, well, it wasn't a republic yet, but it was in the chambers of the Parliament of Guyana. And it lasted for 8 days. 8 days, from February 28th to 8 March 1969. Before I was born, Mr. Ali. Before I was born, and I'm your senior, you see. Mr. Burnham, Mr. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham was Prime Minister of Guyana, and he hosted the first Amerindian village captains meeting. We called them village captains at that time, in the chambers of the Parliament from February 28th to March 8th, 1969. And he said, among other things, that, and I quote, "This conference has been called in fulfillment of a promise which the government made to itself and which was referred to on Sunday, 22nd December 1968 at Independence Park, that we cannot and will not permit the original peoples, the indigenous peoples of this country, to be bypassed in the same way as the native and indigenous peoples of other country are bypassed, ignored, and exploited." Note that word, Mr. Ali, exploited. Now, a number of things came out. And by the way, the Honorable Prime Minister addressed both the opening and the closing sessions of this conference. He said, and I quote again another excerpt from this speech, "I know that many of you, as the spokesmen for the people whom you lead, would like to know what is the position with respect to your lands. As you know, an Amerindian Lands Commission has been sitting and visiting various parts of the country since September 1967, Mr. Ali. The Honorable Minister of Local Government has already made reference to this commission, and although the chairman of the commission, Mr. Fort, has been away for some weeks now as a result of illness, the commission has written and submitted to government an interim report. September 1967, Mr. Ali. Mr. Prime Minister goes on to say, government awaits the final report and recommendations of the commission. But I can tell you today, and today referred to is the 28th of February, 1969, Mr. Ali. But I can tell you today that I have already started to take steps to have transferred with full title to the Amerindian village communities, settlements in the villages, those lands occupied by these villages and additional lands which the people can farm and develop for the benefit of themselves and those who come after them. Let me say that your government, through the Ministry of Agriculture and Natural Resources, will give every assistance, advice, and training so that this farming and the development of these lands will bring profitable returns to you. History lessons, Mr. Ali. And you see, I want to take this extract. You see, in that presentation, Mr. Ali, you told the people of this country, in your address to the indigenous peoples who were before you, who were all young people, generally speaking, and that's a remarkable accomplishment for the indigenous villages and communities to elect young people to lead them. You told them that there was nothing, no minister of Amerindian Affairs until 1992. Get your notepad, take your pen, get your recorder. This is Forbes Burnham speaking here. And this is on what date again? 28th of February, 1969. The responsibility for interior development, which naturally includes Amerindian development and welfare, will come under the Prime Minister himself from tomorrow, 1st March 1969. The Prime Minister of this country assumed, or retained rather, ministerial responsibility for indigenous affairs. Mr. Ali. You know, the truth shall set you free, but some people prefer to remain prisoners of falsehood. It's not my choice. And in the closing stages of this conference, Mr. Burnham said, as my good friend and colleague, Mr. Duncan said, and he's speaking here of the late Philip Duncan, whom the People's Progressive Party recently disrespected in death, said that this is but the first of similar conferences. As I said when I opened the conference in the House of Parliament on Friday last, we do not want Amerindians to be separate and apart. Don't want them to be separate and apart. We don't want to lock them up from nobody else, Mr. Ali. When the British were here, and this is the profound nature of a prophetic leader, Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, write this down. When the British were here, they wanted to keep the Amerindians as a group apart. They called them children of the forest, and they never gave them an opportunity to enjoy all the services which the rest of the community enjoyed. After the British left, there were still some who wanted to keep the Amerindians separate and distinct from the community so as to be able to exploit them politically and economically. He was talking about you, Mr. Irfan Ali. He saw you since 1969, before you were born. Let's talk about land titling. We bring out the books today. We have the books before us today. And you know what Ali said just now? The 2006 Amerindian Act did what? Could we play that again?
Land rights and recognition. The new Amerindian Act of 2006 was a landmark piece of legislation that provided legal recognition of Amerindian land ownership.
But you know, there are some unparliamentary words and there are some unpublishable words. So I will not describe or attempt to describe what category Mr. Ali's statement just falls under. But I'm going to use the facts so that you can decide. Let me tell you first that an Amerindian ordinance preceded the Amerindian Act, and it is as old as 1951, Mr. Ali. 1951, Mr. Ali. And of course, when Guyana became independent in 1966, those bits of legislation that were ordinances, I believe Mr. Nandlal will tell you, they became acts. Now, let me just take this out of the folder. So, in fact, let's go. I think we have some information on 1976 there. We put it on screen, the first page. Now, this Amerindian Ordinance of 1951, Mr. Ali, was amended in 1976. You see that? See that there? That's the amendment. And you know what that amendment did, Mr. Ali and citizens of Guyana? Those of you who are interested in the truth, I wrote about this, I spoke about it, but let me just go it over again because the PPP is never tired of repeating lies. They have repeated lies so much so that they have started to believe them. This is an extract from the official Gazette, 22nd April 1976. And we go, you see that President Arthur Chung assented on the 24th of April 1976. So, Mr. Ali, these are authentic documents, you see. So let's go and we will read out the name of the villages that were titled, Mr. Ali. We will read out the name of the villages that were titled. You see, since 1967, let's get the focus together here. There was the Lands Commission Act, the Amerindian Lands Commission Act. Let's look at that. See that? This was assented to by the governor of Guyana, British Guyana, on the 14th of May, 1966. Weeks before independence. It's the Amerindian Lands Commission's Ordinance 1966. Flowing from this, the Amerindian Lands Commission was established in independent Guyana under the hand of Prime Minister Burnham. And it went to work. I read to you an extract from Mr. Burnham's speech where he says this commission has been sitting since 1967. So this is what the ordinance says. This is the Amerindian Lands Commission Ordinance. It was established for some specific purposes and had a particular mandate. And let's try to see if we can get an understanding of what it was all about. It says, whereas the government of British Guyana has decided that the Amerindians should be granted legal ownership of rights and occupancy over areas and reservations or parts thereof, where any tribe or community of Amerindian is now ordinarily resident or settled, and other legal rights such as rights of passage in respect of any other lands where they are now by tradition or customs de facto enjoy freedoms, Mr. Ali, and permissions corresponding to rights of that nature. And this stems from representation made by Stephen Campbell to the Independence Conference. And you might want to know, Mr. Ali, that Dr. Jagan and the People's Progressive Party boycotted that conference. And so your political party had absolutely nothing to do with land rights, absolutely nothing to do with the Amrina Lands Commission legislation and work proceeding, because you were not at the conference, your party was not there, you boycotted the conference, and therefore what happened you must now learn about. And it goes on to say, and whereas the British Guiana Independence Conference 1965 recognized the aforementioned decision of the government, and this is the government of Guyana, British Guyana, and agreed that a commission should be established by law for the purpose of implementing that decision and having the functions inter alia of determining the extent of any such areas or reservations or parts thereof, and the nature and extent of the rights which Amerindians or any of their tribes now de facto enjoy in respect of such areas, reservations, or other lands. So the land was we own, Mr. Ali. And following representation at the level of the Independence Conference, there was an agreement arrived at, Mr. Ali, that the government of independent Guyana will pursue this business of indigenous land rights and ownership, Mr. Ali. Your party boycotted the conference, Mr. Ali. So, now therefore recognizing that the principles embodied in the aforementioned decision of the government will be enshrined in the constitutional instruments pertaining to an independent Guyana, and acknowledging that it is the policy of the government to assist the Amerindians to the stage where they can, without disadvantage to themselves, be integrated with the rest of the community. So you see, Mr. Ali, 1966 just happens to be before 1992. So let's go now to this business. I want you to play this thing one more time for me, sir, Mr. Operator, about land rights not being respected.
The land rights were not recognized, nor were they protected.
Right. Now let's go to the 1976 land titling. I lost count, so you're going to help me count. I will go through the pains of naming every single village that became a titled village. And that means obtaining legal ownership of their lands. That means, Mr. President, Mr. Irfan Ali, inalienable title that cannot be revoked, traded, or anything at all. And then we will deal with your Amerindian land titling story. Good. So here we go. And I got the book, right? I have the book. So let's get on screen. 1976 issue. We go by page to page. This, the orders, and this is section 9.1, the orders made under section 3 and 17 of the Principal Act and enforced immediately before the commencement of this act are hereby revoked. There's a revocation of orders and insertions of schedules to the Principal Act. And now we go to 292, which says, the Principal Act is hereby amended. Attorney General, you're the master at law in this country. I'm a layman. Go on your program when next you have it and prove me wrong. The Principal Act is hereby amended by the insertion immediately after Section 44, the following schedule as the schedule of the Principal Act. Now, this is the list of the villages that were titled consequent upon this amendment. And after the name of every village, you will see a description. We will discuss the description after. Okay, Achuib, Karadanawa, Aishalton, Awarwanao, Murwanao, Mokomoko, Napi, Shia, Sand Creek, Siwariwao, St. Ignatius, that's the homestead, and St. Ignatius, the farmlands. Yupukari, Masara, Toka, Yakarinta, Taruka, Kanapang, Itabak, Monkey Mountain, Keto, Paramakatoy, Kurukabaru, Kopinang, Waipa, Kaibaripo, Kamana, Patarano, this is the Ambrose village in the south savannas of the Rupununi, Sholinab, Chenapo, Wiki River, Horuru, Oriala, Santa Aratak, St. Cuthbert's Mission, St. Francis, Kabakaburi, Akiwini, Wakapo, Karimap or St. Monica, Bethany, Mashabo, Mainstay Wayaka, Tapakuma, Kapui, Manawarin, Waramuri, Santa Rosa, Asakata, Quebana, Little Canabali, Warapoka, Waikiribi, Kokrit, Chinese Landing, Hotokwai, Hobadiah, Kamwata Hill, Red Hill, Koriabu, Sibai, Tobago and Wauna Hill, Bunbury Hill. And then there were two districts, Anai and Karasabai. This is 1976, Mr. Ali. I hope you're counting. I hope you're counting. Then we go to 1991. In 1991, the Amerindian Act, yes, Mr. Ali, the Amerindian Act in 1991 was again amended, and some more villages were titled. This time, these titles were issued under the hand of Robert Hormond Orlando Corbin, Deputy Prime Minister, under the presidency of Hugh Desmond Hoyt. And these are the villages that were titled. We go to the second page. Chenowing, Philippi, Jawala, Kaku, Purima, Waramadong, Kamarangkeng, Kaikan, Arao, Kurutuku. Yes, Mr. Ali. Play back that thing that Ali said about land titling for me, please.
Land rights and recognition. The new Amerindian Act of 2006 was a landmark piece of legislation that provided legal recognition of Amerindian land ownership.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the rewriting of history will not be tolerated. The records forbid it. And as long as there are advocates such as myself, and there's a platform offered by political parties that embrace truth, facts, and development, like the People's National Congress Reform, every attempt by the People's Progressive Party to rewrite history will be challenged, and challenged by facts. Now let's talk. I'm not going to worry my head about 2015, 2020, because let me tell you this one thing. Land titles were in fact issued in that period, and among those titles that were issued in that period were two in particular that might interest you, viewers. Two in particular that will interest you. There are two villages in the Mazruni. Those two villages were given fake titles by the People's Progressive Party. I'm sorry, I didn't walk with a copy of a thing to prove to you. But this was in 2012, and they posed up with the leaders of these two villages and took pictures and all sorts of things. And when the pictures were finished, they took back those papers from them. And we found them when we went to the ministry. And we discovered that under President Ramotara's tenure, those documents were in fact not signed. They required two signatures, one the president and one, I believe, the head of the presidential secretariat or some such other person. And those documents were not signed. So Kangaruma and Tasirin, those two villages, were fooled in 2012 that they had title. And between the time that those titles, those documents purported to be titles were issued to them, and the time that the David Granger administration finally made it right and gave them proper titles, more than 100 mining blocks were issued on those lands by the People's Progressive Party. So they fooled the people that they have title, and when people came to mine on their lands, and they tried to evict them or tried to negotiate with them for revenues that's provided for in the same 2006 Amranian Act, they were told categorically they have no jurisdiction over those mines. When they checked, they realized they had no title. That's what your government did, Mr. Ali. Now, here's the thing. Most of the titles that are currently in place were issued by the People's National Congress in government. What the People's Progressive Party did, viewers, is that they got some money from Norway from the standing forests and found a novel way to do political campaigning in indigenous villages. And they created what they call the Amranian Land Titling Project. And what they sought to do was to use that money to create an impression in the minds of indigenous peoples in this country that they were now for the first time giving them titles to land. And what was the message they took? They said, oh, when the people said, but we got title in 1976 and we got title in 1991, they said those things aren't valid. That's what they told them. They said the Amranian Act was repealed in 2006 and therefore those titles don't got no value anymore. Although that is not true. Question the motive of the People's Progressive Party. Why did they go out there and tell people that the repealing of the 1951, amended in 76 and 91 Amranian Act meant that those titles now were invalid? It meant, if it were true, it meant that the PPP deprived the indigenous peoples of the titles that the PNC gave them to their lands. It just so happens that those titles could not have been revoked and weren't revoked. But the intention of the PPP was to revoke them so that now they can come back, recreate and rewrite history by saying, now we're giving you titles. The People's Progressive Party only paid attention to the indigenous lands issue when they realized that the bulk of their supporters, the East Indian population of Guyana, was migrating at a rapid rate, and they were in trouble. They came to power in 1992. The elections of 1997 were widely believed to be rigged by the PPP. In fact, the 1997 election was vitiated by the high courts of this country. And instead of the elections being 5 years later, they came 4 years later. The People's Progressive Party's first act dealing with the Amerindian land titling issue came 12 years after they attained government. 12 years. Mr. Burnham became prime minister in 66. By 67, the Lands Commission was sitting. It worked throughout the length and breadth of this country. And by 76, those titles I just read out were issued. The action started from day one. The PPP's first action took 12 years. What did they do, my friends? They went to Barometer, and you remember Barometer features in this list that we just read out? Barometer features in this list. Let's see exactly where it's at. Baramita was among the villages that were first titled, right? Now, they went to Baramita and they did demarcation in Baramita, and then they issued a certificate of title to Baramita, and that was over the same lands that had already been titled. So what did the People's Progressive Party do? Now, there's one significant difference between um, the absolute grant and the certificate of title. Well, two principal differences. One is that the absolute grant is issued under the State Lands Act, while the certificate of title is issued under the Land Registry Act. The second significant difference is that the absolute grant, which is what was given in 76 and 91, do not have boundaries that are demarcated along the lines of GPS reading coordinates and so on. They have natural boundaries, starting from the foot of this mountain, going east to the watershed of so and so place, and going south. That kind of landmark is what those absolute grant had as their boundaries. And the certificate of title has coordinates, GPS coordinates as boundaries. Now, in 1976, the GPS existed? I don't think so. The surveying process was long, hard, and tedious, and the titles had to be given. So what the PPP did is they came and they demarcated the same lands that were already titled to the people. They did the survey, put the GPS readings in place and say, look, for the first time you're going to own this land. For the first time you're going to have a certificate of title. That's what they told them. And you know what the people told us? The people told us that when the PPP surveyed and demarcated their lands and gave them a certificate of title, it was for a smaller piece of land than they had under the absolute grant issued in 1976. That was a deliberate ploy by the People's Progressive Party to be able to come back to that same village and give back to the people under the new certificate of title that piece of land that was first excluded as an extension to their boundary, and then jump on the political platform and say, we gave you an extension to your land. The PPP thinks everybody is foolish. And they treat everybody as though they think they're foolish. We, the indigenous peoples of this country, are not fools, Mr. Ali. We are not fools. So the certificate of titles that they're jumping around and shouting about there, ladies and gentlemen, are but a second title for the same lands that were titled by the People's National Congress while in government in 1976 and 1991. Mr. Ali, for now, there ends your lesson in history on land titling. We have maybe about 10 minutes or so remaining, and I want to deal with a couple of other issues. We hear how connectivity to the internet started in 2020, and that for the first time, this village, that village, and the other got internet. Well, here's a list of 72 hinterland communities that were connected to the internet by the David Granger-led a Partnership for National Unity plus the Alliance for Change. Bring it up and let them see, man. Bring it up and let our viewers see. Mabaruma, RDC Compound, Matthews Ridge, Baramita, Port Kaituma, Santa Rosa Mission, Akuini, Jacklow, Kabakaburi, Karawab, Siriki, St. Monica, Mainstay, Wayakasin, Cotbutts Mission, Maraikabai, Barakara, Kanji Creek, Light Tongue, Plitanka, Siparuta, Itabali, Karatabo, Baidabaru, Carrow, Batavia, Dark Point, Kaikan. Man, you want me to read over this whole thing? Mr. Ali, you want me to read this to you? Let the people who are monitoring this program take a screen grab and give it to you, share it with you. 72 hinterland communities connected to the hinterland by the David Granger administration. And another long list that was subsequently identified for connection by 2019. Some of them were accomplished, others were not. And you're talking about water, Mr. Ali? Potable water, Mr. Ali? You were in government for 23 long years. Your political party. You were pomposetting yourself all over the place. When the APNU AFC came to government in 2015, Mr. Ali, there was a need for several deep wells to be drilled all over Guyana's hinterland. And the APNU AFC accomplished 48 wells, the drilling of 48 wells in hinterland Guyana. Those wells that exist now that you and your administration refuse to maintain because you want them to collapse so you can drill new ones and say, for the first time, in your usual hypocritical fashion. Go to Sand Creek, ask the elderly if they didn't get water in the bathrooms in their homes from GWI. Go to the various villages of this country. You'll see the forced water collection, the hillside water collection unit at this village in region 8. Don't rightly remember the name immediately, but you allowed that. Paramakatoy, that's the village, Paramakatoy. It was up and functioning. I was there. I saw it. But you came to government and you people abandoned it and it collapsed. And the people were without water. Tell us what is the state of affairs there now, Mr. Ali. And then there's talk about all these schools and so on. I'm rapidly running out of time. This history lesson needs some more hours. But let's look at schools, Mr. Ali. You remember the PNC came to government immediately following colonial administration, right? But then again, you don't read history, you write it. So here is a list. Here's a list of schools, Mr. Ali. What we had in 1970 and where we took it by 1979. Yes, Mr. Ali, to quote you, without oil, Mr. Ali. Without oil. There was no, and I'm talking about public schools here. Public schools. This is according to the writings of Dr. Tyrone Ferguson in his book, To Survive Sensibly or to Court Heroic Death. Management of Guyana's Political Economy, 1965 to 1985. That's my source, Mr. Ali. This table says that there were no nursery schools in 1970, and by 1979 there were 372, Mr. Ali, without oil. There were 388 primary schools in 1970, and by 1979 there were 433 without oil. Secondary tops, there were 13 in 1970 and 325 by 1975 without oil. Community high schools, there was none in 1970 and there were 29 by 1979 without oil. Government schools, 31 in 1970 and 55 by 1979. So there were 432 schools in 1970 and 1,214 schools by 1979, Mr. Ali. You know, you harped on this business of who know mathematics and who don't know mathematics. Work the difference, Mr. Ali. There were 432. There were 432 schools in 1970, and there were 1,214 schools by 1979. I make the difference to be 782. I don't know what you got when you did your math. But this was accomplished without oil. It was a new nation, just out of colonization, just trying to build a society of educated folks who would not lie to the nation and who will not try to rewrite history, changing the facts. This is what the construction of these schools was all about, to bring the truth to the people of this country. I don't know if, in the face of these documented facts, the People's Progressive Party and their president, Mr. Irfan Ali, will still continue to lie to the people of this country. And that in the face of these facts, the People's Progressive Party will continue in their attempt to create a wall around indigenous peoples, feed them with untruths and misinformation, and hope that this wall constructed around these indigenous peoples of this country will prevent people bearing the truth, and people with good intentions and people with a real interest at heart will be prevented from communicating with them. Mr. Al, you cannot stop us from relating to our people. I'm indigenous. I'll go to any village. And your people preventing me from going into the NTC meeting does not make me less a man. It makes you less of human being, less a man, less a leader, less a president. And your administration will be depicted as it ought to be, as having lost its way. We are not chattel, Mr. Ali. You do not own us, PPP. We are independent thinking people of this country. We were here first. Before you and your ancestors and all other people came to this country, we were here. And we will always be here. And you can push us as much as you want. We will not break, we will not relent. We will continue to be independent. And you cannot prevent us from speaking to each other. We will not allow it. You think you've won? You have not. You've made a classic fool of yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for today on Nation Watch. I'm your host, Mervyn Williams, thanking you very much for joining us and commending those true leaders of indigenous peoples who came to the National Two Shows Council Conference and represented from their heart the interest of their people, and will go back taking the truth to their people, and will continue to work tirelessly for the development of every single indigenous people of this country and every village and community in this country. I thank you very much. Until we meet again next time, God bless.